This episode is sponsored by KAS Academics. Find private tutoring and online courses, including a free one that I did about mastering LinkedIn, on kasacademics.com. Hi everyone, and welcome back to an episode of The Student Space. In this episode, I'm chatting with Michael from Vtac. Vtac stands for the Victorian Tertiary Admissions Centre, and they're responsible for ATARs, results, special entry access schemes, also known as Cs, and they facilitate the offers between university and current high school graduates. Enjoy this episode as we debunk all your common questions. I'd like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians on this land on which this podcast is recorded on. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be listening to this podcast. Welcome, Michael, to an episode of The Student Space. What we will do today is we're going to chat all about answering your frequently asked questions about Vtac. So, Michael, start us off by telling us who you are and what you currently do for work.
Hi, Mia. It's good to be here talking to you and your listeners. My name is Michael. I'm from Vtac, which is the Victorian Tertiary Admissions Centre. At the moment, I'm working on our website and communications in general. That's kind of a new role for me. What I've been doing there for the last few years, actually, is going around the state and running training sessions for teachers at schools, as well as information sessions for parents and students about the tertiary process. So hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions today.
That's excellent. Oh, wow, we're actually speaking to the right person. This is perfect. Now, tell us what exactly Vtac does. So in my own schooling experience, I know that I had to sign up to Vtac to get my ATAR, but I'm sure that Vtac does a lot more than just that.
Yeah, the ATAR is certainly a big part of what we do, but as you said, there is a lot more as well. For those who aren't sure exactly who we are, we're actually a non-profit agency that's owned by all of the universities and most of the TAFEs in Victoria. So we process all the applications on their behalf. So it's basically about centralising the process to make it easier and more efficient for everyone. So when you were in Year 12, you wouldn't have been applying individually to different universities. You'd have only applied once through Vtac with preferences for any of the courses across the state. And I'm sure we'll talk about that process a bit later on.
Gotcha. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And so I've had a few students come to me and they get confused between what Vtac does and then what VCAR does. Would you be able to differentiate for us?
Yeah, that's definitely a common point of confusion because we both have similar four-letter names that start with V and we're both kind of in the same space. But the key difference is that the VCAA is the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. So they are a government department or agency, and they are the ones who set the curriculum for the VCE and handle all of the exams and assessment and so on. So the VCAA will be doing your study scores if you're doing the VCE, and they'll pass those on to us at Vtac, and we're the ones who calculate your ATAR and then use that ATAR for the purpose of tertiary admissions.
Thank you for clearing that up. I know it's definitely a point of confusion for some students as well. But we're going to chat about preferences today. We'll talk about CESE applications. But before we do, let's just do a bit of a recap on what is an ATAR. And I know a lot of students kind of already know, especially if they're in this part of the year in Year 12. But maybe just give us a rundown of what an ATAR is, what's the point, and how it's calculated.
Yeah, definitely. If you're doing Year 12, you probably have heard of the ATAR, and it's probably on your mind a fair bit. But people aren't always sure exactly what it is or how we calculate it. So I'll try and give a bit of background. The ATAR, in terms of its purpose, stands for the Australian Tertiary Admission Rank. And the point of it is to be able to make fair comparisons between students who've done different combinations of subjects across the whole country. Because there's a whole range of different VCE subjects that you might choose, from English to chemistry, fine arts, politics, philosophy, all those different subjects. And if you kind of look across the whole country, there's even more possible combinations of subjects that a student might have done. So the point of the ATAR is to allow the universities, TAFEs and colleges to make a fair comparison between students, no matter what combination of subjects they've done. It's calculated in each state and territory. So in Victoria, Vtac does the ATARs for all VCE students. And we do that by looking at a student's results in their studies. So we start off by scaling the results to account for differences in competition between studies. And then we look at the highest result in an English group subject. So you've got to have at least one English subject to receive an ATAR and pass the VCE. And then we basically just look at your highest scores in all of your subjects. We'll use 4 of those at the full value. And if you've done more than 4 subjects, we can use up to 2 more as what are called increments. I won't go through the whole calculation in heaps of detail now, so I know we've got lots to get through, but we do have a video on our YouTube channel that goes through the process and kind of breaks it down.
And that's great. What I'll do, I'll link that YouTube video in our show notes. So if any student or even parent listening is still confused, I've seen it and I know schools have shown it, but it just helps clear it up more visually. Michael, another thing I want to ask, and you mentioned about different subjects scaling. And so like I've heard of, specialist maths will get scaled up, but say VCE business management will get scaled down. How is the scaling of a subject determined and why is it necessary?
Yeah, and scaling is something that people have always heard of, but aren't quite sure why it happens. And there are a lot of misconceptions out there about it, which is why we try and do a lot of work to kind of explain the process that people can make good choices about their VCE studies. The scaling process, it actually isn't about the content of any of the subjects. So it's not about Vtac saying that specialist maths is really hard and, fine arts is really easy or anything like that. The scaling process is actually just about the level of competition in every single subject every year. So for example, if we wanted to scale chemistry, what we would do is look at all the chemistry students in this particular year. And we want to know how competitive chemistry was in this particular year. Because the study scores from the VCAA are actually a rank for every single subject. So if you get a 30 in any VCE subject in any year, that's not 30 out of 50. That's 30 as in you're exactly in the middle. You're the average in this particular subject. So going back to our chemistry example, we want to know how hard was it to get 30 and be average in chemistry in this particular year. To answer that question, what we actually do is look at all those chemistry students, but their results in all their other VCE subjects. So how those chemistry students performed in English and music and maths, physics, and so on. If those chemistry students performed above average in all of their other VCE subjects, that tells us that chemistry was more competitive this year. So it would have been harder to be in the middle and get 30 in that subject. Or if it was lower results, that would have shown us it was less competitive. So it's not about how hard the curriculum is in chemistry, it's purely about how competitive that subject was in this particular year. That's why we do it every year from scratch. It's not about individual students or schools, it's about all the chemistry students in the state in that one big group.
Well, this is so good to know because like you said, there's so many misconceptions and everyone has their own story or rumor as to how subjects are scaled. So it's nice to debunk that. I want to ask about different ATARs with actually different same uni courses having different ATARs. So why is this the case where we've got a Bachelor of Commerce at one uni that's say a 93 and then at another uni it's a 90 and then another uni it's like a 70? Some students may think that a higher course with a higher ATAR is better, but I know that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think sometimes people can be under the misapprehension that the universities are all sitting around and saying, oh, okay, well, our Bachelor of X is going to be 85 and our Bachelor of Y is going to be a 70 and so on. When in reality, the ATAR, or the lowest selection rank required for each course, is actually a function of a few different variables. So, for example, if a course only has a very small number of places, it's probably going to be harder to get in because there are fewer places that you can get, and that's going to result in a higher ATAR being published. If lots and lots of people are applying for those places, that's probably going to make it even more competitive and push that number even higher. So the ATAR isn't a reflection on the quality of the course or really anything in particular, apart from how hard it might be to get in based on things like how many places there are and what the demand is. So that's why you'll see different ATARs for the same course, even at the same university at different campuses, because there are different numbers of places and different numbers of people applying for those courses.
And that makes sense. It's kind of taking me back to like VCE economics, supply and demand, just the basics of it, I guess. And
yeah, exactly.
And okay, let's talk preferences. I believe preferences are, you can put your preferences in now if you're in year 12. How many do we have to pop in and do we have to complete the whole list?
Yeah, so the preferences are open now. Hopefully all of the Year 12s listing have already put some preferences in. If you haven't, make sure you do so before the 30th of September, so you're still applying on time and not paying a late fee. You can put in up to 8 different courses, so it's 8 preferences. There's no minimum number required, so you can put down just one course if you want to, but we do really strongly recommend that you put down at least a few courses. So think about some backup options and make sure that you're going to have a few different options just in case things don't work out with that one course that you're focused on.
Now, this is good segue to the next question, because it's like, what order should I put my preferences in? And it should, like, for example, should I put my highest ATAR one first? Should I pop the one that I really want to go to first? What do you recommend?
Yeah, it's a good question. And people often do think, almost logically, that maybe you should put your preferences down in order of the ATAR that's published. But that can be a bit of a trap because you won't actually find out about all 8 of your preferences. You'll only receive an offer in each round from the highest preference which wants to make you an offer. So if you've put down, let's say, 5 preferences, and the first one doesn't want to make you an offer, but the rest of them do, you're not going to get those 4 offers from those 4 preferences. You're only going to receive an offer from that second preference because it's the highest one that wants to make you an offer. You're not even going to find out about those lower down preferences because those places will have already gone to someone else. So if you put your preferences down in order of ATAR, but that's not the order you actually want the courses, that can be a bit of a trap because maybe your third preference is the course you actually want to do the most. But if you get an offer for your first preference, you'll never even find out about or have the chance to do your third preference course. So the most important thing to remember about the preferences is just to put them down in the order that you most want to do them. And remember as well that the preference number does not actually affect your chance of getting in. So for the same course, if you put it first or last, you've got the same chance of being made an offer. There's no advantage to putting a course first preference. There's no harm in putting it as your last preference. So really just put them down in the order that you actually want to do those courses.
Well, this is good. This is really good insight. And so, okay, I remember before you said the 30th of September, we need to get some preferences in. But what if we want to change our mind maybe before our ATARs or change our mind after the ATARs? Can we switch things around?
Absolutely. You've got plenty of time to change your preferences. So do put some preferences in by the 30th of September. Just put in one course or a couple you're thinking about, and that locks in the timely application fee, so you won't be paying a late fee. And then as soon as you put those preferences in, you can log straight back in and change your preferences. And you can keep doing that as many times as you want to, all the way through until the end of the year. I think last year we had someone who changed their preferences over 1,000 times in
my
couple
goodness.
of months, which is a lot, but there's no downside apart from the time you're spending doing it. So there's no need to really worry about being locked in. Just put some preferences in on time. The important date to keep in mind in terms of when to finalize your preferences for this year is the 20th of December at 4 p.m. And that's the deadline for the January offer round, which is the big one. So there's no downside or extra cost or anything like that for changing your preferences. So if you do change your mind, go ahead and do that. But do keep in mind that date of the 20th of December as the really important one. And that's about 4 days after your ATAR and VCE results come out if you're in year 12. So you have got some time to think about your preferences once you do know your ATAR, which is really good.
Ah, thank goodness. We're like covered on both ends, which is great. But are there any courses that require us to apply or put our preferences earlier, like any early offers, for example?
Yeah, there is a small number of courses that require you to put your application in by the end of September. So that's usually the medicine course, the undergraduate medicine course, and some of the fine arts courses at the VCA at the University of Melbourne. The majority of courses can be added all the way through the process, but if you do see an early closing date listed on the Vtac site in Vtac Course Search, it is important to pay attention to that because you won't be able to add that course to your preferences after its early closing date.
Ah, okay. And so I'm sure if a student really wants to do a course, they'll be across when they need to apply by because it would be on the website.
Yeah, hopefully.
And
It is always published in the information. If there is, in the course information, if there is an early closing date, there won't be any surprises, but it is important to do your research as early as possible so you aren't caught out by any of those.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about the moment students receive their ATARs. So, what date are they going to come out at the moment? And then I'm assuming students can receive them either via text or online. Is that correct?
Yeah, partially correct. I think you're showing your age a little bit. I remember getting my ATAR by text as well. But now we don't do text anymore. We have them online and in our app. So it's a little bit different from a few years ago.
21st century. They've got the app now.
Exactly. And it's also a little bit more secure than it used to be as well. So it used to be kind of a PIN that was 4 digits with your birth date, I think, initially. You now have to choose a secure password to be able to access your ATAR and your results. So they come out on the 16th of December, which is a Thursday, nice and early at 7 a.m. if you do feel like getting up early to access your results. But it's important to prepare for that by creating that secure password ahead of time. So right now, if you're in year 12, you can go to resultsinATAR.vic.edu.au and register for the Results in ATAR service. That's actually separate from your Vtac account. So the Vtac account's where you put your preferences in and actually apply for courses. The Results in ATAR site is separate because that's run by both VCEE and Vtac, and you get your results from them and your ATAR from us all in the same place. And you can also use that if you're in year 11 doing a Unit 3 and 4 study and you want to get your study score for that subject. You don't make a Vtac account, you just register with that Results in ATAR site.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, and I know all these dates are set at the moment, but like we are both in, are you in Melbourne, I'm assuming?
Yep.
Yeah, so we've been in lockdown and we've been, working from home and students have been learning from home. If exams get pushed back for whatever reason, will all these dates change as well, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen, unfortunately, because there's no crystal balls available at the moment. Everything's sold out because of the pandemic. If there are changes, we will obviously need to change some of our processes and we'll communicate those to everyone as soon as we can. We did see a lot of disruption last year. There were a few changes and some notable delays last year. We ended up with ATARs coming out right at the end of the year. Hopefully this year it'll be a bit earlier, but if there are changes, we'll let people know. The important thing to remember is that all the universities, TAFEs and colleges do want to make sure that every year 12 student has the chance to go on to tertiary study, just like in any other year. So even if things do change, don't panic too much, just focus on your studies and we'll take care of making sure that you can still go on to study as in a normal year.
Okay, good to know. Everyone relax, don't stress, but you'll still get into uni, you'll still be able to start in the normal uni year if that's what you're looking to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a random question. Is it ever possible to dispute an ATAR? What if you're just not happy with your ATAR? Can you complain to Vtac? Can you order a remark or something?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're welcome to contact us. We do actually run a specialized kind of pop-up service for inquiries immediately after the ATARs are released. So it's called the Post-Results in ATAR service, and you can contact us by phone or by email. You can also just call us on our regular phone number. We'll be happy to talk through your results with you. The thing about disputing an ATAR is that the ATAR itself is actually just a mathematical calculation. So it's not like someone's made a judgment about what your ATAR will be. It's purely a mathematical process based on your results. So you can actually verify your own ATAR yourself using information on your ATAR statement. You can add up all of your scale study scores to produce your aggregate, and you can check your aggregate on the aggregate to ATAR table. So it's a bit of a technical process. We're happy to talk you through that. In terms of disputing things, I think people are maybe often a bit concerned about their study scores, which have then been used in their ATAR. And that's a matter for the VCEE. So you can contact the VCEE. I know they have a very rigorous assessment process. They do also have some appeal processes as well. I won't talk about them in too much detail because they're not Vtac processes. I don't want to get in trouble for talking about those too much. But they do have some quite clear and helpful processes there. So just visit the VCEE website for information about those ones.
Okay, good to know. And let's talk offers now. So I believe first round offers would be sometime in January. How many rounds would there be?
Yeah, so there are now 5 offer rounds. There were 6, including one in December, but we had a few delays to the exam timetable and the results, which means that now the first offer round is in January. Even though there are 5 offer rounds, with 1 in January and 4 throughout February, it's important to remember that they're not all the same size. So the January round is by far the biggest. And that's where the majority, probably about 75 or 80% of offers, will be made. The rounds then decrease in size as we get later in the year. So the first round in February is probably relatively large, maybe about 15% of the offers, but that will keep shrinking as we get towards the end of February. The reason that's important to know is because you can change your preferences between all of the offer rounds, but if you're waiting until the very last round to put your dream course on your preferences list, that's probably too late because that course might be full already. So even though there are 5 rounds, the first round in January is your best chance. That's why that deadline we mentioned earlier on, the 20th of December, is so important, because that's going to guarantee that your preferences will be considered in that big January round.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. And then my next question is a perfect segue. If I receive a first round offer, but it's not my first preference, or I change my mind, I can change.
Yeah, that's right. So what I would do in that situation is first accept the offer you have received. So accepting the offer means you've locked it in there. And it's guaranteed for you as a backup in case you don't get a higher preference offer. Accepting the offer also does not affect your chance of receiving a higher preference offer in the next round. So definitely accept, lock it in there as a backup, and then think about what to do. So if you haven't changed your mind and your preferences are still in the order that you want those courses, you can just leave them alone and you'll be automatically reconsidered for any of the higher preferences. So if you get your third preference, we'll automatically reconsider your first and second preference in the next offer round.
Oh.
If you have changed your mind, you can change your preferences though. So you can add a new course, you can rearrange the order and so on. The important thing is just to make sure that any courses you still want to be considered for are listed higher than the offer you've already received.
Wow, this is so insightful. I had no idea that this is how it works, but this is good behind the scenes to know, because we can get really stressed. Well, students can get really stressed later in Jan when all the offers are coming and changing their mind.
Yeah, it can be a really stressful time. I think what I'd emphasize there as well is that it is stressful and it can be really difficult, but there's lots of support available for you. So if you feel overwhelmed, don't feel like you have to figure it out yourself. Your school has a qualified careers practitioner who can assist you. You can contact Vtac directly. You can call us. You can email us. You can even DM us on Twitter or send us a Facebook message, and we'll get back to you. So can be a difficult time. You might feel a bit overwhelmed, but you shouldn't have to face it alone, and we'll be able to help you out if you are struggling.
That is so true. I just want to echo that. Don't be afraid to reach out, because a simple phone call can just relieve some stress. I can promise you that.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about CEASE. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the acronym properly, but what is it and how does it work?
Yeah, we say CEASE, but there's no right way to say it, I guess. It stands for the Special Entry Access Scheme, and basically it's the big special consideration program that runs in Victoria. So it's run through Vtac. It's a single application form that you fill out through your Vtac account online, but that's then used by all the universities and most of the TAFEs and colleges to apply special consideration. So you don't need to apply individually for courses or for special consideration. It's all handled through Vtac. And the way it works is that it adjusts your selection rank for individual courses to compensate for disadvantage. So it's not going to change your ATAR. Your ATAR is always that number you receive at the end of the year on that results in ATAR site. But what it will change is your selection rank for individual courses. And what that means is it might give you a better chance of getting in to compensate for some disadvantage. So it can be a really important thing to pay attention to.
This is good, because a lot of people would think that it's just extra bonus ATAR points, when in fact it definitely is not. It's just a higher selection rank for your course. So that's good to know.
Yeah, that's right. And the reason for that is that different universities and TAFEs and colleges all have their own policies about special consideration. So you might say that I live in a regional and remote area, and at one university that might be 2 extra points, at a different university that might be 4 extra points. And that's why it doesn't change your ATAR, it changes your rank for individual courses, because they've each got their own policy about special consideration.
Gotcha. And so I assume there are different categories. Can we apply for multiple if, of course, we're eligible for multiple categories?
Absolutely, yes. There are 4 categories in Cs that I'll explain briefly, and you can apply for as many of those as match your situation. So if all 4 of them apply to you, then absolutely apply for all 4 of them. The first one is something called personal information and location, and we encourage every single applicant to apply for that one. It's actually a really easy application. You just tick a box and press submit, and you're done with category 1. And what you're doing by ticking that box and pressing submit is saying, yes, I give Vtac permission to use my personal information to give me any kind of automatic adjustments based on my personal information. So it's all the stuff we already know about you, giving you a bit of an advantage. So we know where you live, for example. It sounds a bit creepy, but we know where you live. And that means that we can give you consideration automatically for living in a regional or remote area. We know what school you go to, so we can give you consideration if your school is underrepresented at a particular university, TAFE, or college. We know your gender, so if your gender is underrepresented in a particular course, for example, some nursing courses will give a bonus to men because there aren't enough men in their courses. Some engineering courses will give a bonus to women because there aren't enough women in those courses. So it's all those things about your personal information, including whether you're an Indigenous Australian, if you're the first in your family to go to university, and a whole bunch of other kind of demographic factors about who you are. That's information we already know about you, so it's really easy to apply for. You just tick the box, and that's it. The other 3 categories, though, are more specifically about various circumstances or conditions, and for those ones, you'll need to provide a bit more information. It's less automatic for those ones. So the next 3 categories are category 2, which is about your financial background, category 3, which is about any kind of disability or medical conditions which have affected your education, and category 4 is the big one, or the broad one, called difficult circumstances, which is for anything else that's beyond your control but not already covered by a previous category. So that includes things like the impact of natural disasters, being bullied at school, family issues, the impact of COVID-19 is a big one there in terms of remote learning, and a whole range of other things that might have affected your education.
Wow, it's actually great because they do cover everything and anything as like a just in case you need to apply for, which is good. If I'm applying for CESE, what do I have to write in my application? Like, are there particular documents I have to supply?
Yeah, so I'll give a bit of a brief overview because it can vary based on what you're applying for. There is lots of detailed information on our website, so please refer to that if you want some more details. But just broadly, for that first category, the automatic one about your personal information, we don't need any extra details. We already have your personal information, you just tick the box and that's it. But if you are applying for any of those other categories to do with maybe difficult circumstances or disability or medical condition, you will need some information or some evidence so that we can assess your application and give you the consideration for that. What that's probably going to look like is some written statements. So there'll be an impact statement that you write yourself on the CESE application form, which talks about the condition or the circumstances, and importantly talks about the educational impact of those. And you'll also need a second statement, which we call a statement of support, that comes from someone who's not related to you, but is knowledgeable about the situation and can verify the circumstances. So it could be someone like your GP or a social worker, a psychologist, someone at school, and they'll submit that statement confirming the information and the educational impact. If you're applying for a situation where those are required, it is really important that you submit both your own statement and that supporting statement. We can't consider one without the other.
And that makes sense because I guess you got to verify it in some way.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, what if our application gets rejected? Will our CESE ever disadvantage us in any way?
Really good question, and something that people often do worry about. It's really important to know that CESE can only ever advantage your application. The worst possible outcome from making a CESE application is that nothing changes and your application stays exactly the same. Maybe you've wasted a bit of time ticking the box or whatever. But in the majority of cases, there will be some consideration and that will be upwards. So it can't be used against you. And it's not kind of carrying through with your offer either. C's is used at time of selection. The offer that you receive, even if C's has been used, is the same offer as everyone else receives.
Oh, okay, cool. That really does reduce a bit of stress as well. And what if I submit my application and I need to go back and change it, or I want to add something to it? Can I edit it once I've submitted it?
Yep, you definitely can, as long as it's before the closing date for applications. So the closing date this year is 5 p.m. on the 8th of October, and we can't accept any changes or new applications after that date. So what we encourage you to do is actually put it in early, put in as much as you can. Even if you're still waiting for some information or still thinking about it, get it in early. And just like with your preferences, you can go back, open it up, make changes and resubmit as many times as you need to until that closing date. We'll only use that last version that was submitted before the closing date.
Oh, great.
We also really encourage you, if you're putting in documents or evidence, to upload those as early as possible. Because when you upload documents to Vtac, our customer service team will actually review those and just double check that everything makes sense, the dates are valid for financial documents and so on. And that way they can notify you if there are any problems with your documents. But if you're waiting until the last minute to upload your evidence, they probably won't have time to do that until after the closing date, so you can't resubmit. So just like with everything else, we do encourage you to put both your application and your documentation in as early as possible.
Great advice, honestly. And what about if a student needs help with these written applications? Can we contact Vtac to help us, or do you recommend us going to someone at the school?
Yeah, I think both are good options depending on your particular situation. So we're always happy to talk to people about any parts of the application process. We can give you advice there. Your school is also a really good resource, because remember that even though it's the first time you're doing this, your school has been dealing with Cs for many, many years. So they're probably familiar with the kind of documentation information that we need. So wherever you feel most comfortable asking for help is probably the best place.
Okay, cool. Now, we've mentioned lockdown a little bit earlier and COVID and everything, but it's such a huge disruption. I'm sure we've all, you've copped it from the Vtac side and students have copped it from their own learning side. And I know students really do feel disadvantaged by the pandemic. And I'm wondering, are there any extra considerations that, I don't know, Vtac is taking in because of the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we thought about a lot when the pandemic came on last year. We actually spent a few months doing consultation with schools last year to understand the different impacts of lockdowns and remote learning across the entire state, because obviously different schools are going to have different experiences. So what we put together was a streamlined process for special consideration in relation to remote learning as a result of COVID-19.
Ah, great.
What we tried to do is make sure this was as specific as possible to individual students. Because even though everyone's had to do remote learning, that's affected students differently based on their own circumstances. Like someone you sit next to in the classroom might have a completely different experience at home because maybe they don't have good internet access or they don't have a proper laptop or tablet to do their remote learning on. So that's why, as part of Category 4 in Cs, we do enable you to indicate your level of impact in various common categories to do with remote learning. So we've made it as easy as possible. You actually don't need to provide any written statements for the remote learning stuff. You just tick the boxes and we'll collect the supporting evidence directly from your school. So if you have been disadvantaged by remote learning, make sure you're applying for Category 4 of Cs and answering those questions about the individual impact on you specifically.
This is so helpful because I know a lot of students have maybe felt that it's unfair. For example, if they're like a metro student and they're looking at regional students who have been in the classroom for many more weeks than they have. So this definitely could apply to them, being, online learning more than other students. So they could submit based on their personal situation, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's the important thing, is making it about your personal situation. So we have had some questions about, for example, regional students who have been back in class for a bit longer than metro students. But what we try to avoid doing is making broad generalizations about people based on big regions or particular schools, and really focusing instead on that individual impact. And that's why our kind of special consideration process does focus specifically on individual students.
Makes sense. Gotcha. Now, again, I don't think this is an area of VTAC, but I think it's worth talking about. So last year, the study design was adjusted because of the pandemic and, all the disruptions. But this year, unfortunately, the study design hasn't been changed for any subject as yet. And I understand while it's not really VTAC's area, I believe it's more VCAR. I'd love to get your thoughts. Do you think there should be amendments to the study design for Year 12s this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we've already heard a range of views in the media and on various kind of student forums about this issue. I don't personally have a strong view because we're not curriculum experts at VTAC. What I would say is that the VCAA are the experts in this field. So they're not just making random decisions. They're consulting with schools. They're making sure they've thought about on a statewide level what's possible and making decisions on that basis. So I'm inclined to trust their judgment pretty much. What I will say, though, is that I think it's important that all students are treated the same and students are reminded that they're not competing against other students who are doing different studies designs. So this decision is kind of statewide, and that means everyone's competing on an even playing field there in terms of study design.
That's true. And you know what? Sometimes we do forget that it's like a ranking system as well. So we have the same blank slate and then we just compete in a way.
Yeah, that's right. You're not being compared against students from 2019 when there was no pandemic. You're being compared to students this year who've all been through the same particular circumstances of COVID and lockdowns.
Absolutely. And now, random question again. Do you think universities are more lenient on the minimum ATAR requirement because of the pandemic or because of lockdown?
Yeah, so it's only a small number of courses that have strict ATAR requirements as a minimum. And this includes things like teaching courses, which have a government-regulated minimum selection rank of 70, for example. As we discussed earlier on, the ATARs that get published, or the lower selection ranks that get published, are more a function of supply and demand rather than being set in advance. So in terms of leniency, there's not really much scope for that there because it's about how people behave. But we have seen some students do things like adjust prerequisites to make things easier for students as a result of COVID, yes.
Oh, okay. That's good to know as well. Now, I've also got some other random questions that I really couldn't fit into a category. So I'm just going to fire them at you. Now, I'm wondering, why does VTAC charge a fee? I've seen students on forums get really angry about the fee that they have to pay because I think they found it a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, no one likes to pay a fee for anything. But unfortunately, it does cost money to run the process of getting people into university. The fee that you pay as an applicant actually doesn't cover the full cost of the application. It's also covered in part by the universities themselves. So I guess it's good that that's being covered. And the reality is that it does cost money to run the service, unfortunately.
That's true. We can't just expect this sorting allocation system for free.
Yeah, we do try and keep it as cheap as possible. And I think around the country, we are the cheapest state, I believe, in terms of fees. Yeah, something we're always trying to keep in mind.
Good job, VTAC. I like to hear that.
Yep. So if you're listening to state, come to Victoria. It's the cheapest place to apply.
Love it. Now, okay, what if I don't want to go to university at all? Do I have to submit VTAC preferences or can I just leave it blank?
Yeah, not at all. So you would only make a VTAC account if you wanted to apply for courses. So if you're planning to do something else, that's fine. Just don't apply through VTAC. You can still access your results and your ATAR at that Results in ATAR website, which is resultsinATAR.vic.edu.au. You register there with your password to access your ATAR, but you don't make an account with VTAC. And that's the same for Year 11 students, for example, who might want to get their results, but obviously aren't going to university next year. You don't make a VTAC account unless you actually want to go on to university, TAFE or college in the following year.
Okay, but what if I want to take a gap year and then go the next year after that? Would my ATAR still be valid or still be considered?
Yeah, if you're taking a gap year, what we'd probably suggest is that you actually do apply this year, and then once you receive a course offer, you apply to defer that offer, which means putting off the start for a year. That's possible for most, but not all courses. It does depend on the individual policies of each university, TAFE and college. But what that allows you to do is actually have your gap year with the certainty of that place being locked in. So you can go and travel, I guess domestically at this point, or work or do something else with the knowledge that that offer is kind of waiting for you without you having to apply again. If you're not sure what you want to do, though, you don't want to apply yet, yes, then you could just apply next year. It's the same process, and yes, your ATAR will still be considered. The ATAR itself doesn't expire, but individual courses might set time limits. So some might say, we'll only consider your ATAR if it's in the last 2 years or in the last 5 years. A small number of courses might say that they're only for current year 12 students, but by and large, yep, you can apply next year just like any other student from this year.
And what about if I'm at university and I'm in my first year and I realize, oh, I don't like this? Do I have to, and so I don't like this and I want to change my course. Do I have to use my ATAR to swap courses, or does the process change once I'm in university?
If you are studying a tertiary course and you want to apply for a different course, you can apply through Vtac just like anyone else. And as part of the application process, we'll collect both your Year 12 information, so your ATAR, as well as your results from your university study already. And it's up to the course you're applying for what they look at. In most cases, though, they'll be most interested in your more recent results, so the results from your first semester or first year of university, for example. But it is up to each course what they're looking at there. And I guess it's a good place to add as well that even though Vtac is who you're applying through, and we're the ones who tell you about your offers, we're not actually making the selection decisions about who gets in. Every course makes their own selection decisions about what criteria they use and who gets in. They do publish those criteria through the Vtac site, so you know what they're using, but that's all up to the course about who gets in.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. Vtac's just the facilitator and the unis are the people who pick.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Now, can my ATAR be used interstate? Like, what if I want to apply for a university or college or TAFE in Queensland or in Western Australia?
Yes, definitely. So the ATAR is now a national rank. So it's valid in every state and territory at the exact same value. So an ATAR of 80 in Victoria can be used in New South Wales at the exact same value of 80. Your individual core subject results, so for things like prerequisites, will obviously be a bit different because in New South Wales, it's the HSC, not the VCE, but those will be automatically converted in the state where you're applying for. So all of the states work together to make sure that the ATARs are comparable and that we have a kind of clear guideline for how we convert the Year 12 subjects. So it's a pretty seamless process that all happens automatically, but behind the scenes, there is a lot of kind of interchange and communication going on to make sure it's a smooth process.
Oh, great. And another random question, what about overseas? And like this probably is a depends because it depends where we're applying for.
Yeah, so as you say, it's really variable depending on where you're going. More commonly overseas, there aren't tertiary admission centres. So if you're in the US, for example, you'd be applying individually to different colleges. Some countries like the UK do have a TAC or a tertiary admission centre model, but it really does depend. In terms of what they're looking at, they're probably less likely to use your ATAR because they may not understand that measure. Internationally, they'll probably be looking more at your individual results for subjects, or they might even be asking you to do tests instead. So, for example, the SATs in the USA.
Gotcha. And I'm wondering, does Vtac have any like upcoming webinars or events that students can attend to learn more? Because I know you've provided a few in the past. Any coming up?
Yeah, we do run a series of online events and webinars and so on throughout the year. The bulk of these, unfortunately, are in kind of July and August, so we've missed those already, but they were all recorded. So you can go to our YouTube channel, just jump on YouTube and search for Vtac Media, all one word, and you'll find those recordings. We do also tend to run things as needed throughout the year. So if you do want to stay informed and abreast of any that are coming up, the best thing to do is to follow us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and that way you'll get information about what's coming up.
Love it. Excellent. And if we do have more questions, again, I'll direct students to the YouTube or your socials. But I really also want to add just to pick up the phone and give you all a call because like you're obviously a lovely team and are so helpful. And yeah, that's what I recommend. If you recommend anything else for students.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got that team of people who answer calls and they're really helpful and kind as well. So don't be afraid to call us if you do need help. Remember as well, you've got a whole support system around you if you're at school. You've got the careers practitioner at your school, you've got your parents, you've got friends, you've got Vtac as well. So don't feel like you're going through it alone. It can be a bit daunting because it seems like it's a really big and important process, which it is, but it's not the end of the world and it's not going to bind you for life. as we discussed earlier on, if you do end up in a course that it turns out you don't like, you can just apply for a different course and move on that way. So try to keep it in perspective, even though it's really looming large for you now. And if you do kind of get stuck or you're feeling like you're struggling with it, give us a call, send us an email, a DM, a Facebook message. We're very happy to help you out.
So helpful. Thank you so much, Michael. This chat has been so insightful. I've learned so much, and I know it will help a lot of students. So thank you again.
Glad to hear it, Mia. Thanks for having me on, and good luck to all the Year 12 students out there with this really exciting and important year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, true. Good luck, everyone. If you like this episode of The Student Space, you can find us on Instagram at the.studentspace, and it's just The Student Space on Facebook and LinkedIn. Also, if you have any requests for podcast episodes in the future, do reach out to us on Instagram DM and I'll make that happen. If you'd like to support us further, follow us on Spotify or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. Alternatively, I would love for you to leave a review. Thanks, everyone. Bye.